Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be looking at grief,
Okay.
and we're going to be using Lisa Marie Presley's essay in People magazine
Right.
as a jumping-off point.
Yeah.
She wrote about her experience with grief after losing her son, Benjamin Kioff, in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to be using that as kind of a springboard to talk about not only her experience,
Yeah.
but just grief more generally.
Yeah, I think what's so powerful about this essay is just how raw and personal it is. She chose to publish it on National Grief Awareness Day.
Right.
And it feels like she's really using her platform to kind of destigmatize grief and get people talking about this thing that we all experience at some point in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that she says right at the beginning that I thought was really interesting is that grief doesn't have an expiration date.
Right.
She says you don't just get over it or
Yeah.
move on.
Mhm.
It's something that you carry with you for life.
And that really challenges this idea that grief is linear, that there's a set timeline for healing. Yeah.
For someone who's experienced a profound loss, that normal,
Yeah.
that they knew is gone.
Right.
And grief becomes integrated into who they are.
Yeah. And part of that experience for her seems to be this intense feeling of isolation.
Yeah.
She talks about how even when people have good intentions, even close friends and family, sometimes they kind of fade away after that initial outpouring of support.
Exactly. It's like there's this unspoken pressure to move on. And when someone doesn't adhere to that timeline, they can end up feeling really alone and misunderstood.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, what are we so afraid of when it comes to acknowledging the long-term impact of grief?
And she even uses the word pariah
Wow.
to describe how she felt.
Yeah.
And I think that feeling is even more amplified because her son's death was a suicide.
Right.
There's this added layer of judgment and stigma.
Absolutely. And it brings up this uncomfortable truth about how we as a society react to different kinds of grief.
Right.
There's often more discomfort around deaths that are sudden or unexpected.
Yeah. Or seen as preventable.
Mm-hmm.
It's as if there's this hierarchy of acceptable grief, which
Yeah.
is incredibly unfair to those who are hurting.
And for Presley, being a mother who has lost a child, it just adds another layer of complexity to her grief.
Of course.
She talks about battling this constant self-blame while also facing judgment from others.
Yeah, it speaks to the incredible vulnerability that comes with grieving and how that vulnerability can be met with either compassion or, sadly, further isolation.
Right.
There's a lot of research on disenfranchised grief where certain types of loss, like losing a pet or a loved one through suicide, aren't always socially acknowledged or validated.
Yeah.
And that can leave people feeling like their pain is somehow less legitimate,
Right.
which is just not true.
Yeah. In the midst of all this darkness, though, Presley did find a lifeline,
Okay.
and that was support groups.
Yeah.
She specifically mentions connecting with people who understand her specific type of loss. She even hosts support groups for other bereaved parents.
That's so powerful because it highlights how shared experience can be such a source of solace.
Yeah.
It's not about minimizing individual pain, but about finding connection and validation with others who truly get it.
Mm-hmm.
Having that sense of, I'm not alone in this.
Right.
I'm not crazy for feeling this way can be incredibly powerful for someone who's struggling to cope.
But it also leads to another really harsh reality that she brings up, which is how her social circles shifted after her son's death.
Oh, yeah.
She actually lost friends and family members who couldn't handle being around her grief.
Wow.
And she had to find new connections with people who understood what she was going through.
That's heartbreaking. But it also echoes something she said earlier about people's tendency to avoid those who are grieving.
Right.
She even admits that she used to do it herself before her own loss. It's like we have this inherent fear of confronting that level of pain because it forces us to face our own deepest fears about loss and our own mortality.
It's complex, right? Because on the one hand, you can empathize with why people might pull away.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it just reinforces the isolation for the person who's grieving.
Absolutely. It creates this vicious cycle where the people who need support the most end up feeling even more alone and misunderstood.
Exactly. And that's something that we really need to be mindful of as we think about how we respond to grief, both in ourselves and in others.
Right. It really is. And that's where empathy becomes so important.
Yeah.
It's not just about recognizing someone's pain, but understanding that there's no one right way to grieve.
Right.
What matters is being present, listening without judgment, and offering support in a way that meets their individual needs.
And for Presley, even the choice to keep going, to put one foot in front of the other each day, is a conscious decision.
Yeah.
She says that she does it for her daughters because her son's love for them was so evident in his final moments.
That's incredible resilience. But it also highlights the ripple effect of loss. It's
Mm.
not just one life that's altered, it's an entire family system.
Right.
And there's often this sense of guilt that survivors carry, this feeling that they should have done more to prevent the loss.
Yeah, and she's very open about how her son's death shattered her and her daughter's lives.
Mm-hmm.
They live with this loss every single day,
Right.
but she seems determined to find something positive in all of this.
It seems like that's the driving force behind her decision to share this essay publicly.
Yeah.
She's using her platform and her pain to raise awareness and encourage people to reach out to those who are grieving.
And not just with platitudes,
Right.
but with a genuine desire to connect and listen.
Yeah.
She specifically mentions the importance of asking people to talk about their loved one, to share memories and stories.
That's such a powerful point. Talking about the deceased keeps their memory alive,
Yeah.
prevents them from being forgotten,
Right.
which can be so comforting for those left behind.
She also calls out the phrase, "you can't imagine,"
Oh, yeah.
which so many people use when they're trying to express sympathy.
Right.
But she points out that people can absolutely imagine. They
Yeah.
just don't want to
Yeah.
because it's too painful.
That's such an insightful observation. It really gets at that protective instinct we have, that desire to shield ourselves from pain.
Right.
True empathy means being willing to lean into that discomfort.
Yeah.
We may not fully grasp the depths of another person's grief, but we can offer support and understanding without minimizing or dismissing their experience.
You know, what really struck me was how candidly she talks about representing someone's greatest fear.
Hmm.
Like, it gets to the heart of why people avoid those who are grieving.
Right.
Like, they're afraid the pain will become contagious.
It's that age-old idea that if we get too close to suffering, it might somehow rub off on us.
Right.
Or it might force us to confront our own mortality
Mhm.
in a way that feels overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's often an unconscious process that
Yeah.
influences our behavior even when we have the best intentions.
But Presley isn't letting anyone off the hook.
Right.
Her call to action is very clear. She's challenging us to be more aware of the needs of grieving people and to offer genuine support.
I love how she reframes our role.
Yeah.
Instead of focusing on our own discomfort, she's urging us to shift our attention to the person who's hurting. She's reminding us that their loved one remains a vital part of their life, even in absence.
And by creating space for those memories, we're not just honoring the person who died,
Yeah.
but affirming the ongoing bond between them and the person who's grieving.
Right.
It's a way of saying, your pain matters.
Absolutely.
Their life mattered,
Yeah.
and we're here to listen.
It's a powerful antidote to the isolation that so many grieving people experience.
Yeah.
And it ties back to her own decision to keep choosing life, to keep going, even when it feels impossible.
That choice, that commitment to keep moving forward is such an act of strength and resilience,
It is.
especially in the face of such profound loss.
Yeah.
I think it speaks to the depth of her love for her daughters and her recognition that her son would want her to keep living, to keep caring for them.
It's a poignant reminder that grief doesn't erase love. It transforms it.
Yeah.
And even in the darkest of times, love can be a source of incredible motivation and purpose. It can fuel us to honor the memory of those we've lost by continuing to live fully and meaningfully.
And it's that love that shines through in her message, even amidst the rawness of her grief.
Absolutely.
It's a message that calls for empathy, understanding, and a willingness to step outside our comfort zones to support those who are hurting.
Her message resonates far beyond her personal experience,
Right.
offering valuable insights into the universal experience of grief and how we can create a more compassionate and supportive world for those navigating its complexities.
And I think it's also important to acknowledge her choice to share this so publicly
Yes.
on a platform where she knew it would reach millions.
Right.
It speaks volumes about her intention to make a real difference, to use her own pain to ignite a larger conversation about grief and loss.
Yeah, it's a courageous act. It is.
And, within all of that rawness, there's this glimmer of hope, this desire to find meaning and purpose by connecting with others and sharing her story.
Absolutely. And it really underscores that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, we're not alone. Her choice to share her experience so openly reminds us that grief, while incredibly personal, is also a universal experience.
Right.
It connects us. It's something we will all face at some point in our lives.
It's definitely a powerful reminder that We all have a role to play in creating a more supportive and understanding environment for those who are grieving.
And that starts with recognizing that grief isn't a one-size-fits-all experience.
Right.
What might be helpful for one person may not be helpful for another. There's no right or wrong way to grieve.
Right.
There's no set timeline.
It's about respecting individual journeys and offering support without judgment.
Exactly.
We have to meet people where they are in their grief instead of trying to force them to conform to our own expectations or comfort levels.
Yes. And it's about being present, listening without trying to fix things, and acknowledging the depth of their pain without minimizing it.
Right.
Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is just sit with someone in their pain and let them know they're not alone.
Presley's essay is such a raw and honest look at the realities of grief.
It is.
It's not sugar-coated or sentimentalized.
Right.
It's just real.
Yeah.
She lays bare the messy, complicated, and often incredibly painful nature of loss.
And that's what makes it so valuable.
Yeah.
It strips away the pretense and forces us to confront the truth about grief, that it's not something you just get over.
Right.
It stays with you, it shapes you, and it becomes a part of your story.
It also challenges us to rethink our own responses to grief,
Mm-hmm.
both in ourselves and in others.
Right.
Are we allowing ourselves to grieve authentically, or are we trying to suppress it or rush through it?
Yeah.
Are we showing up for the people in our lives who are hurting, or are we shying away from their pain?
Those are important questions to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
Because in acknowledging the universality of grief, we find not only solace, but also the strength to offer comfort and support to others who are navigating its uncharted waters.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Lisa Marie Presley's experience with grief, I think it's worth reflecting on what we can each do individually and collectively to create more supportive spaces for those who are hurting.
It's a question that lingers long after the episode ends,
Yeah.
a call to action that challenges us to move beyond passive sympathy and embrace a more active and engaged form of empathy.
What can we do to make sure those grieving don't feel like pariahs, that they feel seen, heard, and supported?
Exactly.
How can we ensure their pain is acknowledged and their loved ones are remembered?
These are definitely questions worth pondering,
Yeah.
conversations worth having, and actions worth taking.
Yeah.
And if there's one thing we can take away from Presley's essay, it's this.
Yeah.
Grief needs a witness. It needs to be acknowledged, validated, and shared. When we create space for grief, we create space for healing, connection, and hope.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a heavy but incredibly important conversation.
Yeah, it has.
Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.